Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I will do something a little different. I'm basically gonna take a library that I've used in a previous video and then show a different example. So previously I explored this library called React Native Calendars. It's no longer being maintained, so a little disclaimer there, but it does have a lot of neat components in here for working with event calendars, and this agenda component is especially pretty neat. And in my previous video I showed an example that was built as a class component, and then I changed it into a function component, but there was a function in there for generating the events that was kind of confusing. So this time around I am going to grab a new example. So instead of rewriting that function code, I'm going to be fetching some data from an API and then be showcasing some events. I think this is a better way of understanding how it works, and also it can give a little bit of insight of how we would, from React Native, grab some data from another place and then show it in the UI. Alright, so jumping into the app where I've created a little example here just to get going. I want to explain just what's going on in this small example, and then we can move on to actually fetch some data from an API. Okay, so first things first, I've created a useState hook here, and you can see I have put in some dummy data here, and the first thing you might get a little confused of is the structure of this data here. So you may notice that on the left side here we have some dates, and these dates are formatted this specific way. So we have year, then the month, and then the day here. Okay, so this is the left side of our object. So these are our keys, right? And for each key we have an array, and inside this array we have all the events. Okay, so right now you can see on the 29th I have this one called test1. If I were to jump inside this array and put another one here, I'm going to call it test4 just for random, you can see that now I'm rendering 2 events here on this day here, 29. Okay, and if I were to create another one here, you can see now we're rendering 3. Okay, so this is the structure that I'm expecting for this agenda component, and so I just basically put this in my state here. Okay, and I tried to type it out up here, so passing this one in my useState, I have a key, there's some string, and for each key we have this array of items, and an item is a name, and for now just a boolean called cookies. Okay, so these are my items. Down here I have function. This function is responsible for rendering out these blocks here for each date, and in here I basically just show the name, and then if the property cookies is true, I'm going to render out a cookie, otherwise I'm rendering out this hungry emoji. Okay, and down here we have the main return, and I just have a save area view, and then I just render out my agenda. Okay, so pretty simple stuff here so far. Okay, now we're going to get to the data fetching part. So how would we actually grab some data from somewhere and then put it into our calendar here? So for that, whenever we do any type of data fetching, we need to use a use effect hook like this. Okay, and as the second argument, so the first argument is going to be my function here, right? The second argument is going to be my dependency array, and for now I'm just going to put it empty. So this one will just run once. Comment it in there. Okay. Now there are many ways to do data fetching in React and React Native, but I'm just going to do the very basic way. So this comes built in React. We don't need any further dependencies to do this, so that's good. Now for grabbing the data itself, we can also use a library, so some library to do a HTTP request, yeah. But we can also choose to use fetch, which is the one I'm using. So fetch also comes built in with React Native. So all I have to do is just say fetch and then put in the URL of the API I'm pinging. And I'm gonna be pinging a very common API, so one that's public and also used in other tutorials, which is going to be the JSON placeholder typicode.com library, and I'm pinging the /posts endpoint. Okay, so let's try to do this. So here I'm gonna tag, I could be tagging it then here because a fetch returns the promise, but I like to do the async way. So inside my use effect, I'm just going to define a function, and that's going to be an async function. And inside my async function, I'm going to be doing this fetch. Okay. And I need to make sure that at the end of my use effect, I also call this get data. Okay. So let's jump up here, and then first we want to get the response, right? So we're going to await this fetch. After getting a response, we can do some things. So let's just call this data. Okay. And then now on the response, you can see if you do dot, we get some different properties here. So we have status, text, JSON, some stuff here. And for the fetch API, if you're expecting to get some JSON data back, what we can do is we can do await, and then on our response object, we can call JSON. So after we awaited the response here, got our response, and then here on our response awaited the JSONing, I don't know if that's the word, but basically transforming the data to JSON. We finally have the data inside our data variable. So now we could, as an initial thing, try to log out this data. Okay. So if I open up a terminal here, you can see that it's logging a bunch of things here, and all this stuff in here that's pretty hard to read is basically my JSON data. And if you remove this metro and open up the React Native debug menu, we can go into debug and then show this debug UI to just get a little more of a neater overview of the data. So here it is way better formatted. So you can see we get 100 posts in here, and each post has a body ID, title, and a user ID. So yeah, these are not really events, right? These are just some posts, but we can still use this API and then just pretend we have a date in here. Okay, so we need to do a little bit of mapping of data, so we actually have a date. Okay, so let me show how we can do this. So we get these posts, and right now it's not typed, so typing that would be beneficial to us. So in here we can do type post, and remember we had title, we have a body, then we use ID, and then we had something else, I believe. I think we had just a normal ID. I think that ID was also a number. Okay. So then here you can just type this the post ID or post array even. Oh, post array. Now, as I said, we don't have a date here, and we kind of want to show this in our calendar. So we need to create some dummy dates. Okay. And I think we got 100 posts, so we can slice it down to maybe 5 posts. That's okay. So when we do set items here, we only want to grab, let's say, 5 of them, right? But before we do this, we need to do some reformatting. So I'm gonna say add a new variable here called map data, and I'm gonna basically grab my data, and then I'm gonna call the map function here. And well, I'm gonna be mapping over some posts, right? So post, we have body, ID, title, the stuff here, and all that stuff is fine. We just need a new date. So we can do return, and then just copy everything. We copy everything by doing these 3 dots, and then on a new line we can add a date here. Okay. And I would like to have some different dates. I think that would be pretty cool. So in order to generate these dates, I'm gonna pull in a library for this, just to make it neat. So down here in my console, I'm gonna do yarn add date fns. I'm just gonna wait for this library to be pulled in, and that was pretty fast. So let me just generate this new date here. So with date fns, we can pull in some helper functions. For me, I would like to define a date up here. And how am I going to define the state? Well, I am going to use this helper function called add days. Okay, and add days takes in a date and then the amount of days you want to add. So the date I want to put in is just going to be today, and the number I want to add is going to be depending on the index of this map function. So up here I'm going to expose index and then just plop it right in here. Okay, and since we call this variable date, we can omit this date. And now we have our map data. Okay. Now this state in here that I just added is going to be a date object. Okay. And we saw earlier up here that this is how we expect the formatting to be of our dates. Yeah. So we need to first of all format this, and then we need to do a little bit of remapping once again, because actually we need a object here, right? And on the left side we need that key, and then we need the array on the right side for each date. Okay. So yeah, let's first of all just go down here, then call format. Also comes built in with date functions, date fns. So if you go up here, you can see we're now importing add days and also format from date fns. Okay, so now we can put in our date and then the format, and the format is going to be year, 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 month, month, and then the day. Okay, so it looks something like this. If you go down here, now lock map data and open up Chrome. Let's see if we can find Chrome. Chrome, it should be here. Yes. So if I scroll down here and look at my map data, should be this one, right? It's not. Let's just clear out this console and then delete this log statement. Go back here. And now we have a date. See? Have a date here, 29, 30, the 1st of December. So yeah, we are adding one day. That's good. Now we have some dates. But we still don't have the format we want, right? We have dates for each post, but we don't have the format that this library requires. So in addition to doing the mapping, we also need to be doing some reducing, because we need to change the overall structure of the data. We can't just have one big array with a bunch of objects in. We need one object as the outermost, as the base, so to speak. Okay. So after doing the mapping, I'm gonna call the reduce function on my map data here. Okay. So let's say let's just call this variable reduced. I'm gonna call pop in map data here, then call reduce. And reduce also takes a callback in here, and as the second parameter we have a starting how do you say, like, what structure do we start with, right? And what we're looking for here is not an array, but it's going to be an object. Okay. And I'm not great at explaining exactly how reduce works, so I would recommend looking up the documentation for this, but let me try to explain it anyway. So we have two parameters here in reduce. The first one is the one that I usually call accumulator, okay, ACC, and then I have the current item as the left one, as the second one here. And the accumulator is the one we define down here. So that's the object. That is the object here, okay. And the current item is going to be, yeah, for each entry in this array, in our case, okay. So what we can do here is that we want to access the date, right? So let's say date. Actually, let's just destructure our date from our current item. Now you can see here, actually it inferred that we added a date here. That's pretty neat. Okay, never mind. So we destructured out the date. So now we can grab the accumulator, that I like to call it, which is this object down here, and then we can add a key by using the array notation here. And I'm just gonna drop in my date here as the key. Okay, so now we have the left side up here added. Now we just need to add the right side, and that's going to be the array. So not an object, but an array here. And in my array, I'm just going to put in one item. Okay. And to create that item, I'm actually going to go up here in current item, and I'm going to destructure the rest of the properties, so everything but date, into its own object, right? And I'm just going to call it cool item, doesn't matter, and I'm going to pop it in here. Okay. Now, if I jump down here and then return my accumulator, I should be in pretty good hands, but let's just try to log this stuff first. So if we, instead of logging map data, now logged reduced, let's have a look at how the data structure is looking now. So if I jump in here, you can see that I'm getting a bunch of dates here. So that's good, and we're inside an object, and for each date we have an array, and inside each array, there you go guys, we have the post here, and you can see the date is removed now, and that's because I destructured out the date, so the date's gone, right? But I still have the rest of the properties, and I can grab all these properties using these 3 dots. And you can see even when I hover over, it's going to show that cool item is these 4 props. Okay. Now you can see I'm getting an array here in TypeScript, and that's because I didn't actually type this accumulator up here, and we could attempt to do that. So in this case, it's just going to be my typing from previous. So up here, I grab this one. If I put it here, I should be in good hands if I remove this item to post. Okay, now TypeScript is stopped complaining. We can finally do set items and then drop in our reduced here. Okay, so now you can see it's populating like crazy here, and that's because we have 1 item for each day, right? And remember, we have 100 posts, so yeah, we can scroll all the way down here basically, and then it stops. And yeah, our post doesn't have this cookies properties, so everything is just an emoji. But I hope you guys understand what we did so far, and whether it makes sense. Okay, so here you can also see there's a TypeScript error, and that's because we've got to update the typing up here. So that's the post array, and we remove this dummy stuff, which is no longer correct. Let's see here. Yeah, that should be good. So we just cleared out this initial state with an empty object, and everything's looking good now. Okay guys, I hope this was useful. If any of this mapping and reducing confused you, if there's something in the data structure that didn't make sense, let me know in the comments. I'll try to explain more. Okay, see you guys in the next one. Peace.